Hi, everyone. Welcome to another WestCog training session for land use commissioners. My name is Tucker Beckett. I'm a senior planner at the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, and I'm joined by my colleague, Charles Vidic, our senior project manager. Today, we're going to be reviewing how nonconformities are regulated by municipalities in Connecticut. This training course reviews the range of approaches taken to protect nonconformities and includes the first ever analysis of all nonconforming use regulations in Connecticut. We'll also review legislative and case law authority for its use. The goal of this presentation is to familiarize you with the legal requirements for regulating nonconforming buildings, structures, uses, and lots. We'll discuss how zoning regulations have taken widely different approaches to the goal of increasing the conformity of nonconforming uses. As a planning and zoning commissioner member or a member of a zoning board of appeals, you are required to understand how nonconforming buildings and uses are regulated and the legal responsibilities that apply to your decision making. This 1-hour training session fulfills your requirement to receive at least one of the 4 hours of training relevant to your role as a planning and zoning commissioner or zoning board appeals member every 4 years. If your term is longer than 4 years, then you must receive the required training during the term of your service on the commission. For reference, the image on this first slide is of a non-conforming commercial building in Putnam, built in 1800. It's an important cultural relic in Eastern Connecticut. Go ahead to the next slide. This course is going to provide an overview of the relevant definitions, case law, and history of non-conforming uses in buildings in Connecticut. We'll then review statewide procedures for approving changes to nonconformities. And then based on a recent WestCog study, we'll review the scope of nonconformities across Connecticut and the criteria used to determine if other uses can substitute for an existing nonconforming use. Then we'll review the exceptions to nonconformities and under what circumstances they can be expanded. We'll conclude with a review of the rights of property owners to determine when a nonconformity has been surrendered, including relevant case law and state enabling legislation. We'll also then close with a question and answer session. So save your questions for the end. We'll begin with a look at some good examples of definitions of nonconforming buildings and uses from the municipality of Weston. If we can go ahead to the next slide. A definition for a nonconforming building is relatively common in Connecticut. A nonconforming building is one that fails to meet one or more of the dimensional requirements of the zoning regulations. It's important to also review the exceptions to dimensional requirements when assessing whether a building is conforming or non-conforming. We're going to touch on that also a bit later. Non-conforming uses are pretty common in Connecticut since we've had more than 300 years of development before the state established zoning as a municipal responsibility in 1925. A gas station in a residential zone or an industrial building in a residential or commercial zone, both of which existed before the enactment of zoning, are both considered nonconforming uses. However, from a practical perspective, providing when a building or use was first established can be a burden on property owners who may not have sufficient records to document the prior existence of the building or the use before zoning was enacted, or before subsequent revisions made their use nonconforming. Next slide. In contrast to Weston, Bethel also provides definitions for nonconforming lots and pre-existing nonconformities that predate the zoning regulations. Definitions are important, but are often overlooked in many zoning regulations. Courts rely on these definitions to determine the intent behind the regulations on nonconformities when making rulings. So if your commission has not established specific definitions for nonconforming lots, buildings, uses, and structures or other dimensional requirements, now would be a good time to do that. Next slide. Unlike the previous definitions found in Weston and Bethel, New Milford addresses nonconforming structures. This is an important addition to the definition, since the Connecticut Zoning Enabling Act specifies the types of structures that are considered eligible for nonconforming status, unless a municipality establishes their own definitions. Next slide. However, few, if any, municipalities have adopted definitions for the intensification versus expansion of a nonconforming use. The difference between intensification and expansion of a nonconforming use is case specific and is determined by how any given zoning regulation decides to establish boundaries on the extent to which a nonconforming use may be physically enlarged or expanded in terms of work hours, employment, seasonal versus year-round operation, and many other factors. What's conforming in one town may be nonconforming in another. The Connecticut legislature has left a great deal of discretion to zoning commissions to determine what is conforming versus nonconforming, as we'll continue to discuss in this session. Next slide. Here are 5 examples of expanding nonconforming uses: increasing the building footprint, the number and size of nonconforming structures, are potential examples of inappropriate expansion of nonconforming uses. And the Supreme Court has ruled on several expansions of nonconforming uses. Still, there's no hard and fast rules for determining if an expansion exists, since zoning regulations across Connecticut vary widely in their definitions and constraints. Next slide. Generally speaking, a nonconforming use can intensify its activities, such as increasing the number of customers or the volume of business, without resulting in an expansion of the nonconformity itself. However, the Connecticut Supreme Court has ruled that expanding a business from a seasonal to a year-round operation constitutes an expansion of a nonconformity, not an intensification of the use. While Connecticut zoning regulations do not define expansion or intensification, these terms should be included in the definition section of any municipal regulations. The advantage of this approach is that it provides transparent standards that property owners can use to better understand their property rights and avoids complications down the road. Next slide. Well, the goal of zoning is to eliminate nonconformities to the greatest extent possible. From a practical manner, most zoning commissions have recognized the need for more nuanced approaches to regulating changes from one nonconforming use to another nonconforming use that has equal or less neighborhood impact than the existing use. The Connecticut Supreme Court has established a threefold test to determine whether a change from one nonconforming use to another is acceptable. We would encourage you to read the decision in Zacks v. Zoning Board of Appeals from 1991 and apply its principles to customize special permit review procedures for nonconforming uses. Next slide. As we mentioned earlier, the Connecticut Supreme Court more recently ruled that expanding seasonal uses to year-round uses constitutes an impermissible expansion of a nonconforming use. The court suggested that the fundamental nature of the use was changed from the original nonconforming use and would have greater impacts on the neighborhood as such. While the court's decision was fact-based and specific to a proposed development in Kent, it reveals that dramatic changes in activities, seasonal to year-round, are not consistent with the limitations imposed on nonconforming uses in Connecticut. Next slide. So let's step back and look at Connecticut case law through the years. The Connecticut legislature authorized the use of zoning in 1925 originally. In 1961, the state legislature eliminated requirements that prevented nonconforming buildings from being rebuilt. Despite that important legislation, though, many zoning commissions have continued to adopt regulations that directly or indirectly aim to eliminate their reconstruction. In 1967, the legislature declared that if a building was in violation of zoning for 5 years without enforcement, it was de facto a non-conforming use and thus protected. 4 years later, in 1971, the law was changed so that it would take only 3 years before non-enforcement of an existing violation would create a non-conformity. In 1977, the legislature required building permits to be issued only after determining the development conforms with zoning regulations. In 1981, the Connecticut Supreme Court upheld the rights of property owners against what was an overly ambitious program for registering non-conforming properties in the Nowunk Fire District. In 1989, the state legislature made it clear that only the property owner can determine if their property should be terminated. In 1991, the Connecticut Supreme Court established its test of whether a change to a nonconforming use is an intensification or expansion of the existing use. which in 2013, the court again established an important rule in the McKenzie decision that requires uniformity regulations within any given zoning district. In that same year, the legislature placed the burden on the property owner to determine the nonconformity status of their property, which is an important distinction. In 2017, the legislature expanded the property rights on nonconforming uses and buildings by declaring that only the owner can voluntarily surrender their right to their nonconforming use or building. Next slide. Next, we're going to talk about the process of approving changes to nonconformities. What's surprising from our analysis of Connecticut's nonconforming use and building regulations is that 48 municipalities do not allow a change of one nonconforming use to another one. In contrast, 119 municipalities allow for one of these changes, as long as it's from a change to one of the same or lesser impact. The overwhelming majority, 73 municipalities, allow for this approach through the special permit procedure, also called special exception. In addition, 25 municipalities don't specify the exact permit procedure required, leaving it to the commission to decide on a case-by-case basis what's most appropriate. The wide range of approaches taken clearly reveals the lack of statewide standards for managing nonconforming uses. Next slide. So, as you know, the greater the number of items that are considered nonconformities, the greater the number of potential combinations that can exist. For example, almost all of Connecticut's municipalities have explicitly established 4 basic types of nonconformity, which we've mentioned several times in this presentation already. Nonconforming buildings, nonconforming lots, nonconforming uses, and nonconforming structures. This table illustrates the number of different ways that multiple nonconformities can exist simultaneously, making the work of the zoning commission or zoning boards of appeal more challenging in navigating the distinct restrictions each particular permutation of nonconformities creates. There are 15 potential scenarios for just these 4 types of nonconformities, as seen here. But in municipalities that include signage, parking spaces, or performance standards as additional areas for regulating nonconformities, the number of potential permutations expands rapidly. If your commission has 5 nonconformities, there's 31 combinations with 6, 63, and so on. Each particular combination of nonconformities has to be evaluated separately according to Connecticut case law. So this can get very complicated very fast. Connecticut's Zoning Enabling Act lists specific accessory structures when a municipality has not identified their own. Next slide. The number of accessory structures that exist across Connecticut is vast. This table provides a short list of the most common ones found in the nonconforming structure regulations across Connecticut. The advantage of identifying your own accessory structure regulations, listing them all out for your own municipality, is that Connecticut courts rely on municipal definitions as their first line of inquiry when they're determining if an accessory structure is exempted from setback standards, has its own unique setback standards, or is subject to the generic setbacks applicable to the buildings of the lot. Managing accessory structures and their siting on a given lot takes planning and consideration of the rights of property owners and their neighbors. Next slide. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Charlie, to talk about criteria for change of nonconformities.
Okay, well, thanks, Tucker. So the goal of the state zoning regulations is to allow those who own nonconforming buildings or nonconforming uses to continue as long as they do not expand their nonconformity. So just going over what we've done from the analysis across the state, there are 119 municipalities that allow a change of one nonconforming use to another, as was discussed earlier. What is interesting is that 67 municipalities make that decision on one variable, the one factor approach. In contrast, there are 52 municipalities that use a multi-factor approach. And this is an important thing to understand because there's an enormous difference in terms of the level of sophistication when there's a one-factor approach versus the multi-factor approach. So let's just talk about one of the early cases that was relevant to this in terms of flexibility. In 1979, the Connecticut Supreme Court allowed for a change of one nonconforming use to another. In part, that decision aimed to avoid the inadvertent taking of property without compensation. Zoning commissions must be mindful of the property rights of those owning nonconforming uses or buildings to avoid unconstitutional takings of property without compensation. In the Point O' Woods case is one of the earliest cases that we have of examples where the Connecticut courts, the Supreme Courts, have actually, and this was an appeals course, but there's also a Petruzzi case in Oxford, which did the same thing and basically said the property rights of the individual who has nonconforming property and lot is still a legal property and has the right to continue it. And that was actually the Petruzzi case in Oxford. They prohibited him from turning a church into a residence and saying it was non-conforming and therefore it didn't comply. But the Supreme Court overruled them on that case and said that it's a legal right to maintain your non-conformities. So moving right along here, let's take a look at the one-factor criteria used by the 67 municipalities we just talked about. What we have here are phrases, almost words, but phrases such as no more objectionable or less non-conforming or proposed use equally or more appropriate. And those ones I just mentioned account for 63% of the terms used to determine if a change of use is appropriate for those taking that approach in Connecticut. So that doesn't give you a lot to go by. If you look up those terms in a dictionary, I think you'll begin to see it's a very squishy set of terminology. And yet, this is what exists with the legacy of many years of zoning regulations really not keeping up with case law and the subtleties that we've just talked about and Tucker's mentioned. Well, let's just go on to the multi-factor approach. So in contrast to the one-factor approach, 52 municipalities have developed a range of evaluation criteria to determine if it makes sense to change one non-conforming use to another less impactful one. So, here's 28 decision criteria, of which when you take all of them together, there's 217 of them around Connecticut. However, the top 5 on the list are the suitability of the new use in the neighborhood, which is follows the Zach case, the traffic impacts that it might generate, especially if they are greater, which is similar to one of the Zach case criteria, the parking and loading requirements, especially if they're greater, impacts on property values in the immediate area. All of those are in some way related to the Zach's decision. And finally, the 5th, the hours of operation. So those 5 constitute 48% of all multi-factor decision making. So if you believe in the wisdom of crowds, of course, it has to be tempered by the Supreme Court decisions. But I think all of the ones that I just mentioned are very closely aligned with the Zach criteria, the 3-factor Zach criteria of the Supreme Court. So this gives you an idea of the range, 28 different criteria that are out there. And it's not that these all don't have some place. The question is really, how complicated do we need to make it? At least it should be multi-factor. And of course, the court has made a 3-factor analysis approach. But as you can see here, our zoning commissions in Connecticut have taken it a step further. So let's go to the non-conforming uses and whether or not they can be changed. Of course, we've already said they can be changed based on the Point of Woods example. And we've also mentioned the Petruzzi case, which is a similar one. In the case of the Point of Woods, it was a building which was a store and a 900 square foot apartment on the second floor. And so they wanted to actually do something with it. And the whole concept here was that a residential use of that property was no more non-conforming than the previous use. And the court basically said that this was an acceptable approach. So approving a change to a new non-conforming use is something that can be done, despite the fact that we do have quite a number of towns in Connecticut that have not yet understood that practice. So let's go on to the nonconformities, exceptions, and expansions issue. So there are dangers of excessive focus on ceasing operations, abandonment, or discontinuance. Probably one of the biggest reasons is that, according to the latest census, there are 327,771 dwelling units in Connecticut built before 1940. And of course, we do have zoning commissions that, including Greenwich and a few on the phone here, that were done before 1940, but the vast majority of Connecticut's zoning came in from 1938 onwards. So that raises a lot of questions about the existing housing stock that we have. But really, when you start looking at the areas where we have challenges, it's lake districts, village districts, pre-World War II non-sewered areas, industrial uses in residential zone, gas stations, watersheds. And of course, you have another countervailing perspective, and that's non-conforming buildings, which are integral to the town character and predate zoning. The classic example is Washington in Connecticut. They've actually gone out of their way to counter the whole nonconformity perspective, to recognize the integral value of those nonconformities to the character of their community. So those are some examples of some significant planning perspectives that are saying, one size does not fit all in terms of the way some non-conforming regulations have been applied at the expense of the integrity of some parts of a community. So here's an example. We have 26 municipalities, and I'm going to go into one of them, which is most significant, that have actually provided flexibility in the approaches to non-conforming lots. And you can see there's exceptions for setbacks, lot size, rear side setbacks, and then exceptions for lot frontage, and then a variety of other permutations, as you can see here, and even non-conforming lot reduced for ground cover. What's interesting about this, these are examples of municipalities trying to resolve issues in a way that recognizes the need and value of some of the housing stock or other buildings that they have in a municipality that might otherwise just sit there without the ability to adjust to changing times, such as the slide that Tucker showed about the enormous range of accessories that have developed in the last 50 years, even the last 20 years. So here, let's take a look at the Columbia example. This is, I'd say, the most sophisticated, most unique, and probably the most litigation-proof of all the approaches that have been taken. And basically what they've done is they have actually varied the setbacks, both rear and side, maximum height, maximum lot coverage, by the actual lot size. So these are on the left side are all the lot sizes from 18,500 all the way up to a little less than 50,000 square feet. Each of them has been given a dispensation with consideration of wetlands, water bodies, and slope considerations, and we'll get into septic and water as well. I consider this to be probably the most interesting and sophisticated, and also the one that in my opinion, is consistent with the uniformity rule that the McKenzie case uh, decided by the Supreme Court. It is consistent with that concept. So it's something that anybody interested in flexibility should look at the Columbia strategy. Well, here's an example of what the Columbia Lake, which is where that is most prominent in terms of its application. You've got undersized lots on Columbia Lake. It predates zoning, and you get a sense of it's tight, but this is an example where that regulation applies. Again, here's another example of the same lake, but a different house. And you can see they're relatively close, very tight in terms of setbacks. So the uniformity rule applied to non-conforming buildings is one of the key issues. So the statute says such regulations shall be uniform for each class or kind of building, structures, or use of land throughout each district. So applying the uniformity rule to non-conforming buildings means that the regulations must be uniform throughout each district. The approach taken in Columbia is an example of the uniformity rule applied to qualifying non-conforming lots and buildings. I highly recommend anybody interested in dealing with that issue with nonconformity, whether it's lots or setbacks, to take a look at that particular approach that they've done in Columbia. So now let's talk about exceptions to dimensional requirements in Connecticut. We identified at least 380 exceptions to dimensional requirements. And this is another workaround that zoning commissions have used to deal with cases where the setback requirement for the principal building may not be the same setback for the accessory uses. And so you see a whole range of approaches that have been done in Connecticut in order to try to adjust for the one size fits all of standard approaches. And whether these exceptions or not would be held up by the courts would be a question of whether or not it's done with consistency and consistency with McKenzie decision of the Supreme Court. I would say that would be the number one factor. So let's talk about the expanding non-conforming buildings. And we did an analysis of the 167 towns to see what goes on. So for those who don't think that, it's not possible to expand non-conforming buildings, we actually found that there's a goodly number that do allow non-conforming expansions with conditions, as you can see in this table here. And of course, allowing conforming expansions, you would think that everyone would do that, but it's a free country, so you have all kinds of things that do happen in the real world. So the total municipalities that allow expansions in Connecticut of one sort or another, as listed in this table, is about 83%. And we have 3 towns that fail to address non-conforming expansions in Connecticut, and we have 27 that prohibit expansion of non-conforming buildings. So you can see one of the reasons we're presenting this training is so that we can really get to a level playing field, that everyone has all the same understandings of the statutes, the case law, and zoning practice in Connecticut. So this is a chart which is designed to give examples of what is actually going on in some municipalities. So if we look at in case 1, the proposed addition does not conform to side yard setbacks, but is no more non-conforming in width than the existing building. This approach has been adopted by 14 zoning commissions in Connecticut. In contrast, case 2 involves an expansion in the back of a building that exceeds the front yard setback, but would not violate the side yard or rear yard setbacks. This approach has been adopted, case 2, with 12 zoning commissions. So then finally, the third example, case 3, involves a building that conforms to the zoning setback standards, but any addition to the side yard would violate setback standards unless the zoning regulations provide for flexible setback standards. This third approach is much like that established in Columbia to reduce the development constraints imposed by small lots, provided the septic system and well water standards are met. That's the Columbia approach. So this gives you an idea of just the diversity of approaches that are being taken in Connecticut. And I have not yet seen any case law that actually has held these things to be either unconstitutional or violating any of the standards of expansion so far. Anyway, there's always the question of future litigation and how any given court is going to look at the facts of any individual matter. But this is one of the key variables is the McKenzie decision and how things are applied uniformly. So if there's a uniformity of approach to how these are done in terms of exceptions, that's a critical factor. So let's just look at a few issues here. This is the 1829 Baptist Church in Wellington, Connecticut, and it doesn't qualify for a side yard exception. If you can look right there, that church is literally about 12 inches from the pavement edge. Gives you an idea. Now, what are you going to do? If nobody shows up for church for 3 months, according to some regulations, or 6 months, they might consider it abandoned. Of course, the other alternative in this case is to relocate the road over, because if you're actually there, the road splits right where that car is, and they could have made the intersection with Route 44 a T intersection rather than a T plus an angled one, which would have eliminated this problem. So not all solutions are zoning solutions. Sometimes the solution is actually realigning the road and getting DOT to do it. So let's look at this. This is the building that you saw at the front slide of this presentation, as Tucker showed it. This building lacks adequate front yard and lot size. Built in 1800, doesn't comport with those two because the minimum lot size is 37,500. It only has 15,682 square feet, most of which is consumed by the large building. It's currently vacant, owned by a real estate company. But fortunately, the Pomfret zoning regulations allow for its continued existence as follows, quote unquote, non-conforming buildings and structures may be expanded or enlarged, provided no increased encroachment, including any vertical, horizontal expansion within a setback area. So that doesn't give you a lot of room, but there may be some room based on the rear of that building. Anyway, it is a significant legacy commercial institution in the town of Pomfret, and it really does merit having much more flexibility if the goal is to maintain some of the culture and commercial opportunities in that municipality. So let's talk about conformity versus intent of the property owner, one of the most important parts of what we've looked into here. So after looking at a wild number of approaches across Connecticut, this table summarizes what goes on. The top one, when changed to a conforming use, well, that one should be, the number 107 should be changed to 167. That should be the most obvious thing in the world. However, that's an indication of the opportunity to improve zoning regulations because that's a basic fundamental. If you change to a conforming use, that should be something that automatically happens. So you see the variety of regulations. And of course, as you know, in Connecticut, what they say is plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery. Of course, we all plagiarize from each other's zoning regulations because we have some commissions that have put a lot of time into developing legally tight regulations. So there's a lot of opportunity that way, but you can see on the statewide level, only 25, that's the blue color there, actually of the zoning regulation, actually say that the owner voluntarily discontinues the use is the basis for when the non-conforming use must conform. And really based on the case law and based on the statute and the number, actually quite a number of legislative initiatives over the last 30 years, that's the only one that actually makes sense. The others are interpretations that zoning commissions have given, and there are some of them that do make sense, but some of them really, it's really an opportunity for improvement and consistency with the statutes and case law. Non-conforming building that is moved, that would be an example if it was moved to another lot that was a conforming lot, that would be an obvious case. But actually, that the way it's worded in most zoning regulations is it doesn't specify whether it's moved to the lot on which it's currently on or it's moved to another lot. So specificity is a very important thing. And so we have, this is one area where there's an enormous need to bring our statewide zoning regulations on nonconformity and the discontinuance rule into compliance with statute and case law. So let's talk about the urban girls versus the zoning boards of appeal in Bridgeport. The non-constitutional taking of private property without compensation by forcing property owners to give up the right to their property has been upheld in the case of Urban Girls versus the Bridgeport ZBA. Voluntary discontinuance is the foundation for any municipal nonconforming use regulation. What we have determined from this training program on nonconformities is that many zoning commissions have redefined the word voluntary to accelerate the elimination of nonconformities. This perspective represents a misrepresentation of Connecticut's commitment to maintaining nonconformities as long as they are not expanded. However, as we've seen, there's a great deal of mission creep occurring in the administration of nonconforming building and use regulations, in which, in part reflecting the lack of statewide oversight of the degree to which zoning regulations properly implement the state's zoning enabling act. And really, let's face it, it's only since 2021 that we've had mandatory training in Connecticut. So it's an opportunity just to learn from each other and also to have some standardization to the extent that it is appropriate. Not that towns should all be the same, but there are certain things in terms of the statute that should be fundamental. Now, we're not going to go into this slide because this is part of the report that we issued last month called Zoning Nonconformities, where rules and reality diverge. But it summarizes, not only in the report, but here, everything in what we've talked about, except for two things. And the two things are basically item 3 and 13. Item 3 is the chronology of zoning amendments that municipalities' zoning commissions should really have a chronology of zoning amendments since the adoption of zoning regulations. Having gone through all of them, that's not the case. There's not a single zoning regulation that we have looked at that goes from the beginning of their inception of zoning. So there's that problem. But the concept of having that is important in item 13, where you consider the non-punitive registration of non-conforming uses. However, as we've indicated here, it should only be done once item 3 is completed, which is actually to have a chronology of zoning amendments. Many commissions do have a chronology, but not all. And that's one big distinction. But even having a chronology, but only goes a certain way back, without that chronology, having a registration, which is what happened in the case of the Nowak Fire District, that got thrown out by the Supreme Court because the registration was done without this, with little specificity as to what actually constituted a non-conforming use in a non-conforming lot and how it was determined, the evidence that could be used to determine what was non-conforming. And that deep dive, basically the court threw that whole concept of registration out, not because the concept is a bad one. The concept is a very interesting and useful one, but to do that requires an enormous amount of effort, either on the part of the commission or on the part of the applicant. So just to summarize, takeaways here: maintaining non-conforming uses in buildings is important, and 4 reasons to allow non-conforming uses to be replaced include, obviously, consistency with the court cases, avoiding unconstitutional taking of property, maintaining culturally important architecture and business ventures. Property owner has the right to voluntarily decide fate of property. Those are 4 important points. And of course, we've gone into the importance and value of flexibility when it comes to non-conforming lots. And treating them as a class or kind of building, and having them in that context so they can be regulated uniformly is one of the most interesting parts of the analysis that we undertook across the state. Particularly, I highly recommend looking at the Columbia approach to that issue. So further takeaways, not that we've done it yet, but I do believe a model zoning regulation, not necessarily one size fits all, since we have a variety of approaches in between urban, rural, and suburban in Connecticut. But I think there are some benefits in developing a model regulation above and beyond the checklist that we put together. And of course, we've talked about the excessive focus on abandonment and discontinuance versus the emphasis on trying to maintain nonconformities, but in a way that is in the interest of the community as well as in the interest of enormous sectors of our state, which are approximately 22% of all housing in Connecticut is in a non-conforming, potentially non-conformity status. It's not that some of the houses that were built before 1940 or 1925 are all non-conforming, but the probabilities of them being so, especially looking at the church, Baptist church in Wellington that I showed the picture on, or the Pomfret commercial building, there was no need to be 30 feet back or 50 feet back. When a horse went by your commercial development back in the 20s or even the 19th century, the closer the building was to the state road or local road, the better it was. There was no pressures that we have now, which are caused by the urban world of automobiles, essentially. So we also have included relevant case law. We actually have a handout that gives a lot more exhaustive list of the non-conforming case law, which goes beyond this list here, but these are some of the ones that we've actually cited in this particular presentation. And of course, we've also included some pretty important law journal articles. And I highly recommend, for those who know Terry Tondreau, well, I knew him and I used to work with him. His work still, even though it's dated from 2002, still is one of the best treatises on Connecticut land use regulation. It's not the only one, but it's actually a very valuable one. And to close out, of course, we have that reference to our study that we just completed. And, feel free to contact either Tucker or myself if you have questions. But at this point, I think Tucker will open it up for questions.
Yeah. if anyone has any questions, feel free to let us know.
Yeah, we'd appreciate any feedback. Absolutely, especially since it's the first one we've given. And Gus, you in particular, I'd be very interested in your comments.
I mean, no, this was great. This was great. The study you've got up on screen there from November. I haven't seen that yet. Is that a something I can find on the Westcog website and print and read? Is that a where is that something I can read in
Yeah, yeah,
where?
you can. And I think it's under Tucker. You want to give the specific part of the website where it is?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
put
in the
the link,
website now.
but it's up with the rest of this of our reports under land use.
Land use, report on zoning nonconformities.
That'd be the one.
Beautiful. Yeah, yeah, we'll print these out and distribute them around to the to our commission. Yeah, 52 pagers. Great. You guys,
Yeah.
did you order them printed at all anywhere, or it's really just a PDF?
Uh, I think it was just a PDF, Tucker, right?
Okay.
I don't think we actually made copies to distribute.
There are no hardcover book versions of it or anything. I mean, it's
I'd love
We
to
have
make
one
it
internal
hardcover to
copy
tell you the truth,
pre-printed.
but
but it's not in the budget. It's not in the Westcott budget.
uh, well, good point. I mean, I think it'd be a great idea to make the color version. The only copy I got was thanks to Tucker, who printed it out for me a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago. Um, it's in color, so I don't know if that was the
No,
reason.
no, yeah, we can. I think we have a color printer in the office. We can make some copies. No, this is great. Yeah, and Sally and I have just are both on this. She's our chair, and we've been texting about it. We're going to sit down later this week. I know it's Charlie, well, because I talked to you
Yeah,
about this. We are, in the process in Weston of trying to change our code to make to actually make it easier for a lot of people to build things that are currently forbidden. But we essentially have no commercial. We have almost no commercial structures at all in our town. We have a tiny little downtown, and we don't have. We have we have fewer than 10 non-conforming commercial uses in the entire town. So that's not a big area of concern for us. It's all about getting rules in place to allow people to change their houses, mostly because about a third of our um, are non-conforming structures, not non-conforming uses. We about a third of our homes are on. We're 2-acre zoning for the entire town, except for the 1.5% of our land that's the village district in the middle, and about a third of our houses are on sub 2-acre lots. So that's and even if a house is on a 2-acre lot, if it's for example, I'm on a 4-acre lot, but I have a barn that is about 3 feet from the property line, so I have a non-conforming structure, even though I have a conforming lot. So anyway, we're what we have is a zoning board of appeals that used to be active, and then after whatever case it was from maybe 10 years ago or so that pushed our zoning or ZBA to be much more strict on the definition of what a hardship was. They basically got out of the business of granting variances, and it's the ZBA that came back to us asking for us to come up with a way to give them discretion to allow people to do things. They would have sympathetic applicants in front of them all the time, say a longtime resident couple, an older couple that needed to widen a staircase, or something, and but it was in a part of the house that was in the setback, and they would just have to say no. And even though they wanted to, we even had some situations where there were ZBA commissioners who were casting dissenting votes, saying, "I know that the town council has advised us that we have to turn this down, but I'm angry that we have to turn this down, so I refuse to turn it down." So anyway,
Yeah.
it's taken us a long time, but because we started on this process almost a year ago now, but we're trying to get the steam going again to do it. It's not
Yeah.
easy.
Well, I got to give you a lot of credit, Gus, because chatting with you actually just gave me a kick in the pants to really continue going through this arduous effort of going through the 167 towns. And but I'll tell you honestly, there's a lot that can be done after what we've gone through in terms of opportunities. So I think it's great that you're looking at these things. Because a lot of towns, I mean, obviously we have 26 towns that have tried to do that. And I think, the one that really struck me the most is Columbia. And I think I might even shared that with you at one
No, you
point.
did, and I've read Columbia. Yeah, no, I know. I think Tucker's been reading my. I've been musing widely in the comments thread during this. I'm just sort of like taking notes as I pay attention with my own thoughts going back in there. And Tucker's been commenting to it. And yes, and Columbia, yeah, I think Columbia is what Columbia has that pattern of they have all these small probably originally seasonal lakefront cottages that predate zoning, and then they institute zoning where with a stroke of a pen, all of them or the vast majority of them are immediately non-conforming. They're on non-conforming lots and they're in the setbacks, and I think arguably the people who wrote the zoning code in the first place in the 50s or whenever they instituted it were, to my mind, were wrong to write it the way they wrote it in the first place, that made all of those, pre-existing homes immediately non-conforming. And they've been dealing with that. And they have the point is that they have a real pattern of what it is that they have, that they're trying to deal with. And it's been harder for us to figure out exactly what the pattern is to the nonconformities that we think people find sympathetic to allow to change. Though part of that is probably that we our sample is we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what our residents will want. We don't know what kind of construction projects our residents will want to do once they're allowed to, because we just don't know what the kind of pent up demand is to make changes to their houses that people aren't even trying because they know it's not allowed. In any event, no, it's great. And there's I see Tracy on here as well. She used to be our land use director, and now she's in Greenwich. Charlie, after I talked to you, I had some great conversations with her. I mean, another thing I will tell you all, one other thing that we are trying to do is figure out the things that are illegal under our zoning code, but that people are doing anyway, and we're choosing not to enforce, because I'm a firm believer that the law should be written in the way that it is meant to be enforced. And the example which I threw out in the comments there is children's play structures. According to our definition of structure, they absolutely qualify. Anything that's attached to the ground is a structure. It doesn't even have to be permanent. And so, if you have a swing set that is attached to the ground, on a plain reading of our town zoning code, that's a structure, and it requires permits and conformity with setbacks. And our office is way too over. We have a couple of part-time people, and they're way too overstretched to begin to address whether they should be permitting swing sets. And so therefore we we don't issue permits for swing sets, and basically every tree house in this town that's more than 3 years old is is grandfathered in because it's never gotten a zoning enforcement action brought against it as long as it's been there for 3 years. But they're all in violation until they've been 3 years. So, for example, we're going to look at defining making exceptions, like children's play structures will be accepted from the definition of structure, although we'll probably then have to put more words around that, like as long as they're less than 100 square feet or 500 square feet and don't have electricity and plumbing, because you never know, somebody could build a children's play structure and build a indoor hockey rink and call it a children's play structure.
Well, those are all great points. And let me just open it up because there may be some other questions here
absolutely,
too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's great, Gus. I'd go on for hours here, but I just want to make sure everyone gets.
No, I see a lot of the people on here. I see Margarita on here as well. These are a lot of the same people. Hi, Margarita. Hi, Tracy. The same. It's the same small group of people that seems to be most focused on these issues.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Tracy and from Margarita if any comments they have and any thoughts they have. This is we've got the brain trust on this group here, so why not? Go ahead, Margarita or Tracy, or whoever.
Tracy.
Tracy?
Sorry, coming. Yes?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, wait, you can't see me though. Wait a minute. There we go.
Yeah.
You're on another monitor. Let me line you up so I'm not looking sideways. There we go.
Yeah. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. I didn't have any specific comments. I mean, I think you did a good summary of different approaches. Each community handles things a little bit differently.
Right.
And you have to go back to, your town's regulation and what you feel is important in terms of goals. And it is important to break out dimensional nonconformities versus use nonconformities so that you can, and that gets mixed up in a lot of communities, and you need to just take the time to break those two apart.
Absolutely. That's exactly right on. And I think that's what Tucker was mentioning earlier. It is one of the things I noticed even across the state that there's a lot of the towns that have failed to put in at least the 4 minimums. I know Westport even goes beyond 4. I think they have nonconformities for parking as well. So, and there's others that are out there. So you've got those kind of things. But I think it's an opportunity.
Yeah, we deal with nonconformities and parking in Greenwich a lot too. So that's a whole separate category of things.
That's one of the few permits that our ZBA actually affirmatively issued in the last year or two. Was one of the country clubs in the pandemic asked to turn a tennis court into a parking lot. And it was
that was the Aztec Valley Country Club.
Oh, you were still here then. And it was too close to
I did that. I worked on that one.
It was in the setback, but the tennis court itself was in the setback, and ZBA gave it to him on the basis that it reduced the nonconformity, because the tennis court was a prior nonconforming use and structure under our language, because ball courts are defined as structures, and the parking lot was also a non-conforming use in the setback there, but ZBA was able to give it to them on the basis that the club was also in violation of the parking regulations. It had insufficient number of parking spaces, so it was ruled as a reduction of the non-conformity by switching a non-conforming tennis court to a non-conforming parking lot.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were next to each other, so it was. From a site work perspective, it was not that big of a deal.
So I'm bothered because at the same time that we're talking about nonconformities, we have to look at how we're going to plan for greater density and plan for more housing. And to the extent that we can't manage nonconformities, keep it more orderly, the development more orderly, I think it makes greater density unduly challenging. That if we could reduce nonconformities in areas where they're adding uses that generate traffic, whatever it is, a service station in a watershed. What a great concept. But, to the extent that it's a use or a structure that really doesn't work with your comprehensive plan, and you're trying to, sorry, I have hungry dogs. I'll move. You've got to think about, where am I taking my town? What do I want my town to look like? I want to enable density, and I want it to develop in an orderly way. And yeah, I don't want to just let people build because, they have a vested right from 50 years ago. I want to try and do it in a more organized way. Maybe it's pie in the sky and I'm Pollyanna. I'm starting to think maybe, yes. So that's what I've been struggling with. And Tracy and Mary, who's also on here, that's we have to look at what all of our towns are how they're going to grow in the next 10 years and how we're going to have more housing. And
look, and it's amazing just how different the pressures are, on
the WestCog towns. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Because for example, Weston, right, we have essentially no development pressure whatsoever. We add fewer than 10 units of new housing a year here. We have, we have, like I was saying before, I could count on two hands all the non-conforming uses that are in this entire town of 10,000 people. There's literally not a single retail business with a sign that I can think of that is outside of, there's like one that's outside of our village district, one or two. So we're starting from just a much, much lower level of issues. And so
it's scarier in some ways for you, because now you're going to be part of our regional housing plan.
Yeah, that's going to be a real.
Look, I know this isn't really the topic here, but
but it is kind of the topic.
But Margarita, I'll tell you what's scary to me. Tell me, put it in words, because I've got voters who are saying like they're scared, but I don't know what they're scared of.
Well,
we're going to add 8 units of housing this year. We're going to add 8 next year and 5 the year after.
Because we all now have to develop together as a region a housing plan. And yes, we may have more nonconformities and messier and whatever, and lots more commercial, but we all have to look at how it's going to impact us, because people are going to be looking for each town to be. Yeah. And so it's a challenge for each one of us, because the pressure is on our corner of Connecticut. And so how we do that in a way that preserves the beauty of our communities, that's where I'm going. So that's why I say scary, because you may not have development pressure right now, but if we don't come up with a plan that works, that maybe I'm casting it in too negative a light, but they did want to get rid of single family zoning in Hartford.
But Margarita, the economics are just so different, right? So nothing other than single family homes pencils in my town. So it doesn't even, if the state came along and waved a magic wand and said that 2-acre zoning is now 1-acre zoning, right? There's something that was in the language of the bill
that was in the language. Yeah, earlier. Go ahead.
If that became a law, if 2-acre zoning became 1-acre law, 1-acre zoning by law everywhere there's 2 acres in the state, here's what would happen in Weston next year: nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it would take a century for marginal change to happen in Weston, because we have fewer than 20 building lots in the town that don't have houses on them now, and these are very, very marginal building lots. They're steep, they're wetland, there's a reason why people didn't build houses on them when they were building houses here between the 50s and the 80s. And so those lots, which currently now, to the extent that anyone's going to build on them, they'd put a large house in the center of the 2-acre lot. If the state waved a magic wand and said 2 acre is 1 acre, then to the extent that one of those lots got built on, it would get two large houses. You know, the lot would get split in half and it would have two large houses. But that would barely affect, there would be no economic impetus to do anything other than build large houses. It's just that you'd have them on 1 acre instead of two. And then as to all the existing housing stock, again, very different in Weston than Greenwich. Tear down math doesn't even work here. Like it's funny, I lived in Westport before here, and I would watch, the classic, the standard form of housing that exists all across Connecticut and New England, your basic colonial, revival house that was built between, 1945 and 1975, all these sort of identical houses that were built at about 2,000 square feet, and they're expanded, and sometimes they're 3,000, these two-story houses that they get torn down to the extent that they still exist in, a ranch or raised ranch or anything in Greenwich or Westport. I get replaced with, a $3, $4, $5, $8 million mansion, new shingle style home. We don't get that here. If one of those houses comes up, it doesn't get torn down unless it's in terrible estate condition, and that's an incredibly slow process. Again, fewer than 10 per year. Just to finish this point, if we magically went from 2 acre to 1 acre zoning, then the tear down math would change so that if a raised ranch in Weston came up for sale this year, it probably doesn't get torn down. If it went from 2 acre to 1 acre, then that house would get torn down and replaced by two large houses. But again, it would be an incredibly gradual process. But that's not to say that these things don't have a much more real impact on Greenwich.
Yeah, let me just mention though, Gus and everybody, well, tomorrow we're having a planner's lunch, which is going to go over House Bill 8002. And that, I think, is Public Act 25-1, if I'm not mistaken. In that whole issue of housing and its relationship to nonconformities will certainly become an issue somewhere along the line. There's no doubt. But the broader issue is just exactly what that House Bill 8002 is going to do. And I think everyone has to put their seatbelts on for this one, because there's an enormous amount of things that are coming down the pipeline here. If you've gone through that law, it's the most significant housing bill we've ever had in Connecticut in terms of the potential impacts it'll have. So this is, of course, just a plug for Tracy and those who are coming to the meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm coming tomorrow. I am coming, Charles. Yep.
Okay, so good.
And
Pat and I are both coming.
I'm not going to yours, but I'm taking a different one on 8002 tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow. I'm taking a seminar on it tomorrow.
There's an RPA meeting tomorrow that I think they're talking about.
I think it's the RPA. I signed up for anything I can find. But that's the whole point. So where we headed, and some of the towns like us I'm looking at our comprehensive plan, and this is where I see the overlap. And how do you develop, which is our whole mission, how do you develop in a way that responds to state law and also is orderly and makes sense and keeps the value of your communities? I know I'm repeating myself, but that's where I've never been as stuck on nonconformities as I am right now. Tracy knows. Mary's on too from our commission. Mary, do you want to add anything to this? Because I know you feel differently than some of the stuff Charlie was saying. I just threw you under the bus.
One of my concerns, obviously, is that one of the ways that you address nonconformities is to use the special permit. And the special permit has so many things that are not quantifiable. So to the extent that you want flexibility, but you also want uniformity, that's where I've been feeling the tension in terms of you want to make sure that your approach to nonconformities are uniform, but frankly, that at least my experience so far has been that we never get the same fact pattern twice. We never get anything even vaguely similar twice. So
that's the value of a special permit, though.
Yeah, and except that the special permit, again, sometimes feels very subjective
It's vague. They're too vague. Charlie, if you did another study, exactly what Mary's saying, I'm just backing you up, Mary, not just interrupting, but
No, please go ahead.
but
yeah,
what
no.
Mary's saying, this, if you did a study of the special permit standards in the state,
I've done that. I've already gone through all of them.
yeah, you
I know
pass
exactly
out.
what they're doing. And that's another training session. And I agree with you 100%. The problem that we have is special permits have been misused in Connecticut. They're not providing the specificity. And the reason for that is commissions are trying to get the best of both worlds, which is to say that they have standards and then be able to interpret them as they wish. And this is fundamentally the problem that we have in Connecticut, because a special permit has gone from being a very precise tool. But you see, here's the thing. I used to work in the federal government, and they had the government accountability offices. Every agency was supervised for compliance with their mission. We have no such organization. OPM should be doing that, but they have never played that role. The courts are not planning organizations. They have no clue of what goes on in the 167 towns with zoning. No clue. They know each case as it comes up. So absolutely, Mary, I agree with you 100%. I know exactly what they all look like. You can take our course online as to what they're doing. We have a course on special permits, and it shows what every single town in Connecticut does. And I can tell you, we have really created some of our own problems by the over vagueness of the standards that exist in the special permit arena. No question about it. But anyway, that doesn't mean a special permit couldn't work. It's basically that the special permit has been misused in Connecticut. That's the problem.
Can I ask you one question on the special permits? Because that's the direction that we're going in Weston, because we don't want to get rid of our setbacks entirely or shrink them entirely. What we want to do is vest authority back in the ZBA to be able to give people in all of these, to Tracy's and Mary's points, that like even when you think there's a pattern, like I'm convinced there is in Columbia, but maybe there isn't really, every time it comes up, it's slightly different. So we do want to give discretion to ZBA, which they used to do through variances until the courts told them they couldn't do that anymore. But here's my question. The concept of a special permit was created by the legislature to focus on uses, right? And now we're sort of applying it to focus on structures, on non-conforming dimensional structures, as opposed to I mean, we do give special permits in Weston for uses because nothing is allowed other than single family housing outside of our village district. So, the handful of things we have outside of it, two clubs, two churches. I mean, just tiny handfuls of things relative to a town like Greenwich. When one of the two churches that's outside of our core district, asked to do a day camp, they got to get a special permit from us. But we're talking about, writing new code to say that for non-conforming structures and to increase non-conformity in the structure. Because to be clear, that's what we're going to allow people to do, is expand things further into the setbacks. Something that's already in the setbacks, we're going to let people expand it further into the setback via special permit. That's fundamentally what we're talking about here.
That will not work under the McKenzie decision. In the McKenzie decision, you can actually have regulations that are more restrictive under the special permit, but not less restrictive. So if you want to increase the setbacks for a special permit, you can, but you cannot reduce the setbacks under the McKenzie rule. That means the only way you can do that is if you want to create exceptions. You can't use a special permit for that. Special permit,
and just
that's the way it works under the McKenzie rule. Take a look at that case, because a lot of people look at the McKenzie case and only look at it from the point of uniformity. But that McKenzie case also deals with a special permit and its limitations.
Mm-hmm. And two other points, which would be, one, the special permit is really, the concept underneath it is to add conditions on a use that is allowed, but because of its nature could have impact on the surrounding neighborhood. But it is allowed.
And its location.
And yeah, and so it is already allowed. And you seem to be saying that you would use it to allow things that would not normally be allowed. And that would be my concern. Go ahead, Charlie. You're the expert.
It basically, special permit is like a little zoning district within a zoning district in terms of how it really works. Even though it's never called that, because the only reason that it is allowed in that district is that it has to have so many conditions placed on it that it actually creates a micro district that is like a cyst within another part of your body that somehow nobody bothers the cyst in your body because it's not affecting the rest of the how your body works. And the body being the district, the residential district on which that thing happened. Now, what's happened though, of course, we have special permits for commercial, we have special permits for industrial. Well, in many ways, we've gone too far with the use of special permits when you're dealing with industrial, when you can still deal with those things on a site plan basis. It's mission creep on the special permit. Only one town in Connecticut doesn't use the special permit, and I won't mention which one. But the point is that the special permit has gotten a life of its own. It's not that you can't use a special permit for commercial industrial uses. You can, but there's plenty of reasons where I've seen it go more than the need to go. You could use a site plan review for many of the things if you have a very sophisticated site plan review process. But anyway, it's not that you can't use it for everything, but I've seen it.
There's another thing that Charlie, you just touched on, and Sally's very aware of this. The bill, HB 802, and also the flavor of the legislature, they're trying to get us to get rid of special permits, is my read. They want more and more to just be without any extra conditions. So it might be difficult to do, even if theoretically clean, we could lose our ability to do special permits or some of it in the next few years, because that was where they were headed anyway. They wanted like the office conversions are as of right.
Nursing home conversions
are as of right. All that stuff that is going to as of right, not even, and we read a lot of that as we could still require site plans, but what they're gunning for is special permits.
Yeah, I agree that is going on. I think the summary review concept they're coming up with, I would argue is nothing more than a conditional zoning permit. And then the question of how you develop a conditional zoning permit. In fact, we had a discussion this afternoon about this with our own in-house staff. And basically the whole idea is no one has defined what a summary review is yet. I believe that at least it's a conditional permit concept. I could arguably say that you could condition the zoning permit that the applicant must have a private meeting with all the abutting property owners in the area, in not a public meeting, but a private meeting, to make sure that there is input. And that would be a condition of the zoning permit, which would be called a conditional zoning permit. But for the sake of the state, we'll call it a summary review. And basically, I think you can accomplish even more than a special permit, because I've been involved with cases where you sit down with a developer before the zoning commission ever meets, and you're sitting with the neighbors that are all interested in this project. They all sat down with the developers and they hashed out what they wanted. And if you do that, first of all, you don't have to worry about Robert's Rules of Order or whether you've only got 3 minutes. And honestly, while this particular case never turned out to work, the process was very interesting. And I dare say, since summary review has no specificity right now, there's an enormous opportunity to define it in a way that's helpful to the community. And that's, I think, one of my interests right now is how can that happen so that we don't lose some of the importance of the reviews that we would normally have. I mean, I'm putting that out there, of course.
No, Charles, that's very interesting because that's one of the things that we've wrangled over is whether and how to give any specific weight to adjoining property owners versus anyone in the town. Because, for example, we've had situations in front of ZBA where somebody has said, I want to expand my garage, but the garage is in the setback and it violates, our code. And they'll actually get their neighbors to come and testify in front of the ZBA to say, yeah, we love Bob. Like, let Bob expand his garage. We're on the other side of the property line, and we don't mind at all. And ZBA, under our current laws, just says, doesn't matter. We don't care. Like, nobody has any weight. And so, on the one hand, we've been thinking that writing something that makes it easier to do a thing you want to do, if the abutting neighbors say yes, that seems nice. But then we have other people on P&Z who say, no, that's going to lead to conflict and bribery. And you can draw out scenarios from any direction. So I'm actually specifically curious. You're talking, Charles, about a town where you have witnessed this process. What town is it, and under what piece of law is that allowed?
It's not under any law. It was what actually happened in the free-for-all of a developer being proactive in a case where they knew that it was better to try to meet with people before a public hearing, that's sponsored by the commission.
But it wasn't that by getting signed permission slips from the affected neighbors, they could go to the town and build into the setback, for example, because they got a signature from the neighbor saying it was okay.
No, it wasn't any of that. It was basically getting a collaborative approach to a solution without actually meeting with the zoning commission. And then once having gotten a sense of what the neighbors thought, being able to go to the commission without a public hearing involved with those neighbors, even if in this process, they would have had a public hearing. But I'm just giving this an example. If there is no public hearing under summary review, then that is a way that the commission could actually say, look, as a condition of the zoning permit as of right, A, B, C, and D, plus we require a meeting that you have privately with the immediate abutters. I'm just giving an example. This is not, nobody is doing this. This is something for you to just think about as a way to think about another way to deal with the summary review's limitations.
Okay, let me, by the way, I had Tucker through the comments flip back to the slide. I don't know if you guys are looking at the screen. I had him flip back to the slide, 3 cases for expansion, because I do want to ask you a specific question, and also great to have Tracy and Margarita on at the same time. My murder board of people who tell me when I'm wrong. Okay, if everyone could look, let's use the one on the far right, case 3, and it's easier to do this with boxes. Let's say, for the sake of argument, in case 3 that this is a non-conforming lot, and it's a tiny lot. We're 2-acre zoning, and let's just say that's an eighth of an acre lot that happens to have a prior non-conforming structure on it, but it's not a prior non-conforming use. It's a single family home, right? And the yellow part is the existing home. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that it is already inside the setbacks on all 4 sides. It's a tiny lot, and let's say that it's inside the setbacks on all 4 sides already. So there is literally no direction in which you could expand this house without punching further into a setback, because the entirety of the structure is inside the setbacks. Now, focusing on case 3, where there's that proposed addition, right? What we're trying to say is, okay, in situations where that proposed addition is something that we actually, as leaders of the town, want to allow, because there are good reasons for it, and it's not harming anybody to block it. We were thinking that we would say that you'd go in front of ZBA. And let's say what that proposed addition is. That proposed addition is putting in central air, and it's putting a compressor in on the side of the house in that gray box, okay? The way our code currently is written, a compressor on a concrete pad is defined as a structure, so you can't build it inside the setback. If we were to decide that we want to allow people to put compressors next to their home, even if it's in the setback, we've thought of it as there's two possible paths to do that. One is that we could define HVAC equipment as not structures. So we could change the definition of structures to exclude HVAC equipment. And therefore, if you wanted to put HVAC equipment in that gray box in case 3 on this screen, even though it's in the setback, you could, because it's not a structure anymore and the setback doesn't apply. The other thing that we've been talking about doing is saying that you could go get a special permit to do that. Are you saying that that would be an improper use of special permits to say that you could go in front of ZBA to get a special permit to put HVAC equipment there, even though it's in the setback?
Yeah, that's what the McKenzie decision has said.
Got it. Okay. So I got to read McKenzie again. So just to pick on that example for a second, let's just say there's good, let's not argue about whether it's a good or a bad idea to allow HVAC equipment in the setback. Let's just say that's the example we're using now, and we're accepting that the town leadership believes that HVAC equipment should be allowed in that gray box. Are we saying that we then only have two paths? One is to define HVAC equipment as not a structure, and 2 is to just change the setback for the entire town?
Well, if the whole town is one zone,
it's all one zone. All one zone.
It would be that, or you do the exception, the rule by exception, or certain things. Well, accessory uses may not be the same setback as the principal building, for example.
Right.
So,
Greenwich does. Yeah, Greenwich does a lot of that. I know, where they define different setbacks for all these different things, and we don't. We define everything as a structure, and structures have one set of setbacks: 50 feet on the front, 30 feet on the side.
That's what you should change right there. Because if you saw the slide that Tucker went into, we have an enormous number of accessories. If you saw the types of accessories that chart, you want to show that, Tucker, that shows.
You don't have to go back. I know the chart, but we're a small town. We're simple people, and we're having enough time. We're having enough trouble. Margarita's waving. Margarita, what's your answer? Margarita, you're on mute. Margarita, you're on mute.
Yourself. Yeah.
We have one set of setbacks for accessory structures for each zone. There aren't multiple accessory structures. I can send you it. So it's a one-page.
No, I've looked at it, Margaret. You don't need to send it to me again.
No, it's a one-page thing, and each zone, the accessory structures have a different setback. And I would just make regulations that enable people to do what you want them to do.
The only reason why we've been going in this other direction that I just outlined is that we don't it's a lot of complexity for us to create new tables with new setbacks for hypotheticals that we don't even know exist, because we don't. That's why we can't. ZBA is asking. This whole process started because ZBA came to us and asked to get their discretion back, and we're trying to give the discretion back to them rather than, because and it's taken us a year to get to not completing anything as it is, because I'm an unpaid volunteer kind of doing it in my spare time, and we don't have a perfect model to follow, and we're like, we could do what Greenwich does, but we don't have the staff, and we don't have the scale of the problems that Greenwich has. We don't have somebody looking at all this.
Gus, if you look at that table, you should go back to that table. Tucker, show them the table that shows the wide range of things. And look, at Weston is no different than any other town in terms of human behavior. So if you go back to the one that, not this one, but the one that shows the entertainment accessories and the other ones, you have to go way back. If you look at this list, I can tell you, Gus, okay, there it is. Now, look at this list and tell
Yeah.
me how many of these things you do not have in your town. Not the ones you have. Tell me which ones you don't have.
I'm not aware of a bocce court, but if anyone has one, they're welcome to invite me over to play bocce. No,
That's good.
we have all of these things probably.
Yeah, I know you've got quite a few of them just because I've gone through your zoning and minutes and wetland minutes. So yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff. And you think about this, then the question is, how many of these things have not come to you because they know they can't do it?
Or they just build it and nobody notices on 2 acres, or that's
or yes, or that too.
We've got both these things. And look, that's the thing, is that we feel like if we take a look at this slide here and we spend the next 2 years trying to decide what the setbacks should be for each of these individual things, should tennis courts and bocce courts have the same setback? Or, that may be too many angels dancing on the head of a pin, but, we could say, should ball courts have different setbacks than chicken coops? And what we're saying is that we don't want to spend all the time doing that because we're just spinning hypotheticals endlessly. Yeah. We just want to give ZBA the authority to let people do it if nobody's harmed.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing that you can do of these things, I would say there's certain things that should rise above to be a higher order. And one of them would be American Disabilities Act ramps, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that the other would be in the case where maybe you have propane tanks that are on a property and they need those for whatever reason. There are a few things which are like critical, which relate to just the functioning of a house. And even an emergency generator would be an example of a few things like that where you have exemptions. Right? Currently, we have exemptions for spires and cupolas and other things that do not need to meet the height requirements. You could have a few exemptions for things that are really so critical to normal housekeeping. That's a thought, and I know sometimes
that's one category of that's one category of things that we're probably going to do, where we're going to say HVAC equipment, generators, propane tanks. We'll come up with some blanket term, hopefully that someone else already uses, that groups all of those things together and stop defining them as structures, and then they'll be exempted. But fundamentally, we do want to allow people to expand certain structures in the setbacks. We do want to let people expand their garage in the setbacks if no one else cares. We want to let people do that.
So it's basically, it's either taking Margarita's approach, which is a standard accessory setback standard,
right?
Or there are certain exemptions that you might establish. So I mean, basically, what we should do, because we've already come up to about 7 o'clock here, and I don't want to keep everyone going. But what we can do, I'd be happy to have another conversation, just not to hold everybody up on this.
The last question is, how do we give discretion to ZBA? That's who wants it.
But it's pretty hard.
I got to jump to a Reading Board of Selectmen.
Bye, Tracy.
So
it's pretty hard because that's not what.
Thanks, Tracy.
It's not what the Enabling Act has.
Then what is ZBA for? Or ZBA never meets because there's nothing for them to do.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But the thing is that the Enabling Act, the State Enabling Act, doesn't set up the ZBA to be to do what you're suggesting. Before we quit, because I got to.
No, I can tell you, Margarita. Some towns actually have delegated the special permit or special exception to the ZBA.
We took it back away from them because then So yes, and they do, but only Charlie, back to what a special permit is, an allowed use on which they may be putting additional conditions, may be going given its nature. Mary, you added words there. But Charlie, before we sign off, somebody who already left said that, I didn't catch her name, but it was one of the people who was here in the beginning. She wanted a training on how we go about adding more housing opportunities.
And iceberg.
Yeah.
Well, we did give that about 2 years ago.
Oh, but now we're doing it in the context of a different
Yeah.
world.
Well,
I
actually,
mean, we
the
know,
new
yeah.
world is actually what, and Tucker maybe should speak to this.
Hi,
All of
Tucker.
the council governments are now working together on a fast track plan. And maybe, Tucker, you should mention so they all know this. This is a very important thing, Tucker, if you want to mention it to them.
Yeah, right now there's a coordinated effort between all the cogs to go through the entire language of the act with a fine-tooth comb, pull out. We have multiple sets of eyes from multiple cogs going on every single section
Hmm.
of the act, and we're putting together a very comprehensive review document
Great.
that highlights specific actions and timetables that are relevant for municipalities, for cogs, and then also things that are still sort of up for that we've identified that are maybe require more clarification or maybe even require legislative fix or require particular care from municipalities in navigating.
Okay, great. That would be fantastic because
Yeah, that's a key
it's in
thing.
the context. I mean, you know that I don't miss we try to go to your seminars where there were quite a few of us here dutifully, but yeah, that would be good because we're dealing with a different world. And Charlie, if I can't find it just because Mary I think is interested,
Yeah.
um you sent me about maybe 5 years ago what you think is a model special permit regulation, and I couldn't find it anymore. And I wanted to go back and refer to it. Do you think you could resend it to me?
Uh, I can only guess. I may have suggested it was either Stonington or North Stonington.
Okay, well, we can look
I
at
think it was
those.
Stonington because the issue had to do with specificity.
Yes.
Uh, and
Same thing
that,
we're talking about tonight.
yeah, and I believe it's Stonington. First of all, whoever was in Stonington at the time was the protege of Glenn Childer, who's I used to work with him back in the 70s and 80s. And Glenn is the most knowledgeable person. Um, he was anyway. I think he's retired. Um,
Mhm.
about some of these issues, and his protege really, whatever he did or whether it was inherited, it's really one of the more specific standards that's
Oh,
out
I
there.
know who it is. I know exactly who you're talking about. Yes. Very smart person. Yes. So, okay, I'll
I
look at
think,
those. Mary, let's look at those in conjunction with the work we're doing.
That would be great.
yeah, Stonington was the town that I recommended, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, because it's very unusual, and I've recommended it to other towns to do the same, but not everybody, because the specificity it makes all the difference in the world. It's the difference between uh, horrendous public hearing meetings where there's all kinds of negotiations that go on and on versus like, okay, well, here's a standard. We have a very specific criteria. It makes a big difference, in my opinion, both for the public and the commission itself.
okay, we'll look at this. I think we probably have, same as Gus was doing, we probably have a lot of other. Mary and Noel, did you have any questions left that we talked right over you guys?
Yeah, I think the only thing that obviously we could go on for another couple hours, except everyone's hungry. The nonconformity issue is also affecting ZBAs because now, in addition to hardship as a standard to go before the ZBA, the reduction of nonconformities of certain nonconformities is now the basis for ZBA to exercise their authority. So to the extent that that now has to go to, that's an issue that used to be handled on an individual basis. ZBA is probably seeing nonconformity issues more than it had in the past. So that would be another area where addressing nonconformity training is really going to be critical because they have to determine as a basis for their authority that there's a reduction in the nonconformities, and that's the issue that they address. So that's another area where kind of the ZBA authority is expanding. At least
And
that's my understanding
Yeah.
of it,
and
subject to
what,
correction.
yeah, we had a legal opinion that had us refer, did we make that public, the Ziska? I think we did, didn't we? We had a legal opinion that sent the applicant to our ZBA in order for the ZBA to decide if the reduction in the ZBA, if there was sufficient reduction. Mary, what was the wording?
The obviously the applicant was going to the ZBA for variances, and the basis for their going to the ZBA was not only to get those variances, but to use the argument of the reduction of nonconformities as the basis to be before the ZBA and to get ZBA relief. They couldn't argue hardship, so they had to argue reduction in nonconformities.
And it's Mike Ziska who did the opinion for us.
Yeah, but the thing about that is, if that's the case, the ZBA needs to be authorized to deal with the nonconformity issue. It can't be done under the hardship clause. So that's a delegation.
No, it's actually it's kind of not to put the cart before the horse here. Their authority is based upon a review of nonconformities in issuing variances. So they're giving the variance. The variance they gave was the typical variance of you can do this, this, and this that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, except we're telling you that you can. And the basis for our even reviewing this for you is not hardship. It was not a hardship case at all. There was nothing about the lot. There was nothing about even the particular proposal that was a hardship. So the only basis the ZBA could use for reviewing and granting a variance was, oh, you are claiming that you are reducing nonconformities on this property.
We made it public, the opinion from Ziska that told us to do this.
But that's inconsistent with the Supreme Court cases on it.
No, that's why I'm going to send it to you. We're going to send you Ziska's opinion. Mike Ziska, you know who
I know who Mike Ziska is, and he's very well recognized, but there's nothing in any Supreme Court case that holds that, except when the ZBA is delegated that authority through the zoning commission to carry that out. Under that context, yes.
Yeah, well, we did that.
Context.
Well, and also, I believe the Varillo case was the case that basically said that is a basis for exercising authority in addition to hardship.
We'll send it to you.
Remember,
Well, yes, the Varillo case, though, dealt with nonconformity issues, but that Varillo case basically that got turned down because there was no hardship in the Varillo case.
Right. But the great thing about the Varillo case, it's probably the best discussion of all of the basis for ZBA authority, including the ones they weren't applying at the time. But that was the first that I had seen something other than hardship as a basis for ZBA.
But that's the case.
It was unsuccessfully claimed, I should say.
Yeah, but it's only when the ZBA has been delegated that authority by the zoning commission. That's the key variable here. ZBA does not have any authority unless it's delegated. And in Connecticut, there are quite a few towns that delegate that authority. In fact, there's multiple, and there's also the same with special permit versus special exceptions. We have Danbury that has the planning commission does the special exception, the zoning commission does the special permit. You have all kinds of scenarios across Connecticut. We have a whole nother training that deals with some of that, actually.
I guess we're used to doing everything because we're planning on zoning in Greenwich. So we see it all. It all comes before us.
Yeah, no,
I think I can talk to you offline later this week.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's a great state of Connecticut. The number of permutations of how things are done.
Yankees are independent. We're going to do it our way. Our way is the right way, whatever it is.
You're right. There's no doubt about it. It's a great state from that point of view.
I mean, basically, we're just trying to fit a square peg through a round hole. We are, and I know that this sounds crazy to a lot of people. We want to allow our residents to build a whole bunch of things that they haven't been allowed to build for the last 40 years.
And change the regs. You got to change the regs.
I get it. Because what we're trying to do, because we're conflicting with the fundamental purpose of zoning being to reduce nonconformity. We're sitting here saying, no, we want to increase nonconformity. We just want to have some control. We just want to have some control over it. And we want to give that control to ZBA so that people so
But-
that elected people can look at each application and say, yeah, this is an okay increase in nonconformity, while this other one is crazy and offensive to the neighbors.
Right. And but in the end, you're kind of spot zoning
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you're enabling the ZBA to spot zone.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
easiest
It's better to
way.
deal with. Yeah. Better to
Change
deal
the
with it as a
regs.
zoning change.
We can just get rid of
Well, I'll
all our
tell you
side
what. This has
setbacks.
been a very entertaining and you know, and what we can do, Gus, if you want, I'm sure Tucker and I would be happy to chat with you further on the details. But even if you have a proposal and send it to Tucker, because he's our point of contact for
Yeah,
any zoning amendments in the region, you know, we'd be happy to, you know, to
Okay.
take a look at whatever you come up with.
yeah. Are you guys in an office in
So,
Danbury or something?
Anything,
Newtown.
They're Newtown.
No.
oh,
It's close
Newtown,
by.
Sandy Hook.
Okay.
Yeah.